Welcome to the second day of the fourth edition of the Tata Steel Bhubaneswar Literary Meet. May I request the audience and our students standing around to come and please settle down in the audience, to come and take a seat because we have a fantastic session coming up. Our first session of the day is Stories from the Seven Sisters, Mitra Phukan, Prajwal Parajuly, and Nabina Das on Stories from the Northeast. This will also include the release of the Odia translation of Parajuly's Gurkha's Daughter. A short introduction to our panelists. Mitra Phukan is a writer, translator, and columnist who lives in Guwahati. Prajwal is a Nepali Indian author whose works focus primarily on the lives of Nepali-speaking people. And Nabina Das is a poet and translator who's based in Hyderabad. They will be in conversation with Malavika Banerjee. Thank you. Podium mics off.
But there is no script. There was no script. So it's a lot of oral telling, and that is a problem because a lot of the oral literature is being documented, but there are no storytellers. Gradually they are fading away, so that is a problem, and which is being addressed in various ways. And before I hand it over, you asked me how do I feel about being known as a Northeastern writer.
Also as a Northeastern writer, that's just one of the things you're known as.
Actually, a writer from the Northeast. I prefer to say India's Northeast because it's a geographical location. There's no getting away from that. So yes, of course, I'm proud to be an Assamese writer. I'm proud to be a writer from India's Northeast. But that's not all I am. Just as I am a woman writer, but that's not all I am. We all have, as writers, we have multiple identities. As people, we have multiple identities. And at different times, we are within Guwahati or within Assam, nobody calls me a Northeast writer, okay? I am a writer in English from Assam. That's a different category altogether. So we have these categories, which is fine, as long as we are not only that, or we are not viewed only as that.
Okay, and as a poet, it takes on a few more complexities. And you in fact, in your recent collection, have even addressed issues which we consider, major pan-Indian challenges right now. So Walt Whitman had said, "I contain multitudes." So would you say that about your poetry?
First of all, good morning, Bhubaneswar. It's lovely to be here. Thanks to the organizers and Malavika jumping onto your question. As a poet, things become, I feel, more challenging. Although I'm also a fiction writer. My first book is a novel, and then I wrote my first poetry volume. But I've been writing poetry since the age of 7, I think, praising the Lord and all that, which quickly got over in a couple of years. I became very, if I might use the word, anti-national. So coming to this new popular term called anti-national, I think being from the Northeast, it's also more important for me to see storytelling as a means of resistance, as a means of power, empowerment. And to what Mitra Ba just said, it's not just one sort of category, it's not one categorization or identity, it's like multiple identities stitched onto a larger frame. So it's very much like the loom that operates in villages, the rural areas. They still work on looms, which you can see we are wearing here. So storytelling happens not just as an oral practice, which is a huge tradition, and I think Northeast relies heavily on oral tradition, and that also entails poetry and songs. And what I did in my book was to find find a new diction, find a new language in protest and resistance. And I'm just talking in the context of my current book, Sanskarnama. It's written in English. But having grown up in Guwahati, born and brought up in Guwahati, And because people ask me, are you Assamese or are you Bengali? Ohomia ne Bengali? That's the question. Bengali na Oshomia. So the plain answer to this is, I know I'm both, or maybe I don't know what I am. Because for me, identity is fluid. I grew up with Thakur Marjuli, grandmother's tales in Bengali. So Thakur Marjuli has been a staple as much as Buri Air Khadhu in Assamese has been. So all these stories have kind of formed different parts of my identity, and later on I took them out when I lived in New York State, and now I'm in Hyderabad. So I always look out for storytelling from Telangana, or whenever I visit places like this, I try to get my hand onto these sort of poetry, song, lyrics, folklore, and I feel that constitutes a great part of my writing. And I know all the writers here, Prajwal, Mitra, and the others who are here, I mean, they would sort of vouch for it. That's how it works. Because it's not a monolithic institution, this Northeast. And as Mitra pointed out, it's a geopolitical term. We are India's Northeast. So I'm looking for what is North in my identity and what is East. I don't know. The answer will never be found. I think it better not be found, because I'd like to create a different identity for myself as far as I go in life, as a writer, as a poet. And as a poet, I think it becomes more challenging, because you really have to sort of skim over new ideas and old ideas and keep mixing them up and talking about them. So, from Thakur Marjuli to Buri Air Khadhu to modern, raps and folk songs being sung again, mixes. So I teach popular culture and creative writing. So for these matters, it really makes a lot of sense to me. So I'll come back later. I'll hand over to Prajwal, maybe after.
Yes, so Nabina mentioned that, being a poet makes it more challenging. Now, your challenge is also exacerbated by the fact you also stay abroad for a lot of the year. And there you now traverse, so you're a Nepali Indian. There are lots of hyphens in your life. And how does that inform your writing?
Mala, I think at the end of the day, being categorized as a writer from the Northeast or a Nepali-speaking Indian writer is extremely limiting. I'll give you an example. My first two books, and the only two books I've written, are about the Nepali-speaking world, about the Nepalis in the Nepali-speaking belt of India, Nepal, Bhutan, whereas my novel, Land Where I Flee, is based in Sikkim, where I come from. Now, when I went to my agent and told her, I'm thinking of writing a children's book, she said, you know what, Prajwal, I don't think that's a very good idea. And we parted ways. She said, I had already established myself as a certain kind of a writer who writes about issues of people who have not been represented very much in the literary world, and so on and so forth. Your question, okay, that doesn't answer your question, I realize. Hyphens are interesting. I sort of see why I would be promoted as a Nepali-speaking Indian writer more than an Indian writer. It helps me stand out. Which is why I've often argued that all the attention, a lot of the attention that was bestowed on the books had nothing to do with the quality of writing in them. A lot of...
I think you're being harsh there.
No. A lot of it had to do with the fact that A, I was from the Northeast, B, I was a Nepali-speaking Indian writer, so it worked very well in my advantage. But at the end of the day, I think it's a terribly limiting proposition. Again, I see why they do it. More power to them. But as Mitra says, we are so much more than just Northeast, writers from the Northeast. And I have had half a mind to write a book that is completely devoid of any geographical anchorage. I've thought of that, but then sometimes I get insecure. Sometimes I wonder, oh, what if my agent doesn't like it? What if a publisher doesn't like it? So I hate to say this. At the end of the day, I am a writer who is driven by the market and who is driven by what my publisher wants. I hope that answers your question in a twisted way.
So it does, but so would you never do an equal music, for instance? An equal music, this book by Vikram Seth, which had absolutely the word India didn't feature in the book.
I have thought of the idea of writing a novel based in the world of literary festivals. Mala, you might very well be a protagonist in it. But the first time I broached the idea with my agent, she was not very supportive of the idea.
God bless her.
We have parted ways. Who knows? I mean, after this literary festival, I might be so inspired that I'll perhaps do it. But I am sick and tired of writing about the Nepali-speaking world. I will be honest.
So you're reaching that point where you will write your equal music, which is
maybe
completely away from anything which was Vikram's world, but yet was Vikram's world. Yes. So what about you, Mitra? Is that novel bubbling inside you as well?
Actually, it has bubbled out. It's with my publisher, and it's not placed in the Northeast. But because I live in Guwahati, I'm more comfortable in the physical space. Like I write about not metros, but then things are happening in the metros also. What I think is when we write that first novel, or that, I don't know about poetry, but first novel, we base it in absolutely rooted to where we are. Then gradually, because that's where we are comfortable, that's what we are seeing.
That's the story that's been inside you for the longest as well, in a way.
Perhaps, yes. And then gradually, because nobody is absolutely rooted to one place nowadays. People are moving all the time, staying part here, part there, and so on. So gradually, these other things come into play. So in my next novel, it's not going to be about the Northeast at all. It's about a more general kind of a thing. And also already in certain short stories that I have, or certain even, A Monsoon of Music, which is nominally based in India's Northeast, but it could be anywhere. And when I write about musicians, I write a lot about musicians. They could be in any town in North India. So basically, I think the story and the plot, it demands the location. It depends. If you are writing about a certain kind of story, then you will base it in a certain kind of place. If you are writing about, it's not the location that dictates the story. It's the other way around, at least for me. That's what I think.
Well, I'll jump onto the word rootedness. It's such an interesting word. Recently, I was asked to write a creative bio by the editor of the Best Indian Poetry Collection 2018. It's the first of its kind, Best Indian American Poetry. So Best Indian Poetry is here. So in that bio, I said, I feel I'm a ginger root, and ginger root that spreads, propagates. It's the Deleuzian concept, of course, of being rooted to every culture from where you are. Like there is a locational point, but you reach out. You just start, forming your subcultures and subcultures, and assimilate or accumulate, and then spread around again. So to be a ginger root is good. That's what I feel. Also because of the taste, I like ginger.
It's not even a root.
Filmmaker Manikal said somewhere, why would I be rooted? Only vegetables are rooted. And Manikal, a huge name in Indian cinema, if you care about Indian cinema, I think was spot on. Like, why would anyone be so steadfastly rooted? I know there is one place of origin, but from there, as Prajwal said, it's limiting just to be called a Nepali Indian writer and Assamese or Northeastern writer or whatever. All that is such, okay, they do give you some sort of a market profile for a while, but after that, if you are a creative person indeed, I think you would want to break out of that mold and spread out. I was reading last night a portion which was a short story. It's going to become a book. A young writer from Assam called Shalim Hussain, and it's a folk tale called The World's First Crow. You know, and you know it starts with an old woman who just discovered turmeric. Like these stories are from the backwaters of Assam, where these you have this chor and sapori. Chors are basically the silt banks that develop along the bank of Brahmaputra, and they are so wide and huge that people actually build houses and they grow vegetables. But these are all seasonal things because Assam is renowned for flood. I'm using the word renowned just for the heck of it. But every flood season, people would move their homes back, and the vegetables would just be taken off, and they would live literally on water on boats or stilted houses, then come back again the next season. So Shalim's story is a pointer to show how the world discovers and rediscovers itself. So being rooted as a storyteller is successful only if you are able to grow roots further out. That's all I think.
Can I meander slightly from this topic and
Certainly.
talk about the expectation that is thrust on you as a writer who is writing about, the Northeast or something here. When you write about a community that has not been represented very much in, fiction or fiction in English or fiction for an international market, there's also this obnoxious pressure of your community expecting you to act as its mouthpiece. I'm sure Mitra and Nabina have faced this problem plenty of times. My novel, Land Where I Flee, is about this upper middle class family in Gangtok where, I take into account every Indian, every South Asian taboo you could think of and have a blast with it. But there was a bit of a backlash. I had Nepali Brahmins writing to me saying, oh, just when our community needed some good PR, you decided to wash our dirty linen in public. There is a quote-unquote lower caste character in my book. I had a few quote-unquote lower caste characters. People write to me saying, yeah, we are aware of all the discrimination that is meted out on us, but you didn't need to announce how bad we are as Nepali-speaking Indians to the world. So there is that pressure. It's this burden of expectation, which...
But you do write about it you have tried to write about a gay character, Agastya. Bhagirathi is marrying, but this lower caste person. But there's also this joy of seeing this matriarchal figure who's at the center of it all.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mala. I have a badass 84-year-old grandma in my book because I was sick and
Who
tired.
smokes beedies.
I was sick and tired of reading Indian South Asian women of a certain age who went out in the sun and bottled, and bottled mangoes pickled mangoes and bottled them and told stories to their grandchildren. I didn't grow up surrounded by women like that at all. My character is a beauty-smoking woman who has no qualms about puffing the smoke into, politicians' faces because she understands that when she smokes in front of men of power, it intimidates them. But Mala, I'm not going to say that women in the Northeast are far more emancipated than women in the heartland, but I have come across a lot of women in the Northeast who are very emancipated, which leads me to the final thing. What we write, our novels, our short stories, our poems, are not representative of any culture, any people, any language. These characters represent only themselves. Mitra? Yeah.
I was just going to ask the question about the women characters. You know, your book, The Collector's Wife, had this strong central woman character. And again, it was set against the insurgency of the 80s and 90s. So I was going to ask, he preempted my question, that, you know, women from the Northeast traditionally are seen as communities and cultures where women have a greater voice. Agency, yes. So do you think that comes across in your in the stories that emanate from that region?
See, again, this is a question of heterogeneity. In Assam, there's a very strong tradition of Assamese written literature, okay? And yes, when you think of Indira Goswami, Mamoni Roy Som and all, they have extremely strong women characters. And even men writers, they also have. But it is a very stratified society. I'm not saying every woman is walking around in a very liberated kind of a fashion. It's not like that. There's much that needs to be done. But, you know, to get back to what you were saying, that, you know, people say in Collector's Wife, since you mentioned it, because it was set against the backdrop of the agitation, students' agitation and insurgency and so on. And I showed, as a writer, we all try to show both sides, okay? And when it came out, it was in the middle of it, a lot of people from Assam, they asked me, why did you show this side? Which was the negative side. Why did you show this side, which you also have faced? Yes. So that is a problem. And then because I write in English, they say, you're writing in English, it will be read by a audience which is outside Assam. Why did you have to show this? It's not true, but it is true. And they know it's true, everybody knows it's true. So that problem is there. And I find that in a lot of Assamese writing of that time, not of this time, of that time, this side was glossed over. So those problems come. And yes, as a writer who is a woman, most of my point of view is from the point of view of women. I try sometimes to, you know, make the point of view from that of a man, but somehow it always comes, which is a very limiting thing. It should not happen like that. But then I don't know, they turn out to be strong. You know,
Your
they rise
characters
above.
have agency as well.
They do, and I try to make them rise above the circumstances. That's the point of the story.
And Nabina, so, you know, you, as I said, I'm focusing more on you as a poet. So how do you see writings from that part of India showing women in a certain empowered light?
So Mala, just a trivia, my first book, which is a novel, is not set in Assam. And I was not ridiculed, but questioned heavily. It's called Footprints in the Bajra. It's the backdrop is Bihar in the early 90s. The nascent Maoism, which was, like, popping its head right there. And later on, of course, Maoism became very popular as a topic. But it's one of the first books, and it has been referred to in a few articles. So why, as a person from Guwahati, from Assam, did I choose to write a book set in Bihar? The character is the protagonist is a woman. There are two women. But of course, one of them doesn't have any specific identity. And I think I was fashioning her on the kind of women I have seen, I have grown up with back in Guwahati and in Tezpur, two of my hometowns, and Shillong being my another third hometown where I spent considerable time of my childhood. I've been exposed to cultures from Meghalaya, from Assam, most parts, and also largely from Tripura. And that's one thing I did. But being a lover of folklore, I always look back to Assamese folk tales like this woman character called Teji Molla. And Teji Molla is, to me, the one of the earliest feminist characters that I've come across in Assamese oral literature. Later on, the story has been written down, of course, but it's all part of oral lore. Teji Molla is killed 3 or 4 times by her stepmother, and here, of course, the stepmother is not as a woman. I mean, the character is very much patriarchal because the father, who's a more empathetic soul, he's away, he's a merchant, and Teji Molla is repeatedly killed in the rice mortar, and then, she's cut in pieces. She is thrown into the river, and then she pops back to life every time. So, in my opinion, storytelling in the Northeast, if you look at Tejimola, is an example of how not emancipated. That's such a Western import. This word, I would say, aware. Women who have eagerness to jump back to life, to come back.
Resilient, basically.
Yeah, resilient women. So that already existed in public memory, in popular tales, and in folklore, and we have kind of imbibed it as we grew up, listening to these stories and reading these stories, and reading Orupa Patongia Kolita's Felani, which is also another important book from Assam, which has been translated into English. Felani is again, that woman character. We can't just call her a victim, although there are signs of victimhood inflicted on her, but she sort of traverses all the movements Assam has seen so far. Today, like, we are going through a critical time in Assam and in the Northeast. And I don't want to talk politics here, but politics is a part of storytelling too, right? So the Assam movement, the Borderland movement, Alpha, all these movements were part of the Felani story. The very name Felani actually means the discarded. Felani, somebody who's been thrown away, Felani. But she is not Felani. I mean, she does challenge the notions of being discarded as a woman, as a marginalized woman, as a tribal woman or Assamese woman. She claims different identities at every stage. Somehow it's like a Tejimola sort of reproduction, coming back to life, being resilient. And as a poet, what I wrote in my book, the latest book, also has a lot of Assam and Northeast. And I think it's only natural because, being part of the storytelling tradition in the Northeast, I had to put them back in my poetry. So if you grab a copy, I think you'll know better what I'm trying to say. I'm going to read some poems in the evening, so if you're still around, just come by.
Yes, there's a poetry reading session where Nabina will be back. Yes, so this is your perspective from the Northeast. Now I thought I have always had friends from the Northeast who tell me these wonderfully funny things that people, they encounter in cities like Bombay and Delhi, where, when ignorance meets insensitivity, you can either laugh or be very angry. And one thing I have to say about my friends, and I'm sure all of you from the Northeast, is you all have a tremendous sense of humor, and you can take all of this with a lot of grace and calm rather than, getting hot under the collar. So do you face such a thing, for instance, people, stereotyping you and asking you crazy questions?
Mitra, we in the Northeast have a very strong sense of persecution. I mean, a lot of it is for good reason. But the stereotyping, the discrimination is often deliciously, disgustingly reciprocated. For every time we complain about somebody in Delhi being called the C word, we forget the fact that in Meghalaya, we have a tendency to other anyone who is not a tribal with the word Dakar. For every time we complain about someone at the airport in Bombay asking us if we are Indians, we forget about the fact that all the Marwaris in Sikkim are pejoratively referred to as kaiyas or dhotis or something along those lines. We as human beings are inherently discriminatory. Irrespective of what we, say of ourselves, we are people who are constantly looking at the other in others. So that's there. It's a two-way street, and I will also mention here that up until 4 or 5 years ago, I didn't even know that Meghalaya, the Khasi culture, was matrilineal and matrilocal. So why would I expect somebody in Bihar or somebody in the deep south to know a lot more about the Northeast than they do? I do my bit. Every story in the Gorkha's Daughter is prefaced with a map. people asked me if that was to inform my American reader or my British reader about, Kalimpong and Darjeeling and Sikkim and where these places are in relation to Nepal, where a lot of migration happened from. I said no. That wasn't my intention at all. My intention was to actually inform the Indian reader that these places were all in India. I have been introduced as a writer from Bhutan. I have been introduced as a writer from Bangkok, all in Indian festivals. I mean, these aren't festivals in Africa or Europe. These are all in Indian festivals. So yeah, I mean, we say, oh yeah, we go to India. I look, quote unquote, more Indian than my sister does, who has Mongolite features. And, she has complaints every so often. I see where the complaints are coming from. But we are kind of evil in our own way in our part of the world. So, yeah.
So, would you like to add to that?
Yes, this is absolutely true. The 8 states, we know very little of each other. Only now are we opening up. And I think, in a way, English language in India's Northeast has a special place because there are so many languages and Hindi is not really an option, that through this medium of English in which we all communicate. And it's not an elitist language in the Northeast at all. It is a language of convenient communication. Yeah, it is the lingua franca, and it does not have, we know where it came from, colonialism and all that, but it does not bear the stamp of, oppression, aggression and all that, not in the same way. Because all the other languages do. Hindi does, Assamese, Bengali does. So many, there are so many ramifications in these languages. So English has filled that up. And I think that is one of the reasons that writings in English are coming up so powerfully from this region now. Little late, but still, little late in the day compared to, India.
It started with you, right, Mitra?
No, actually it started with me and Penguin, but before that there were others who had self-published and so on, so I won't really say. And that's only because I'm so much older, right?
No one couldn't tell. So anything you have to add? I mean, you look gloriously Bengali, if I may say so.
Okay, I've been also called a Malayali. A Malayali professor was hell-bent on marrying me off to his student. And he pursued it more than the boy did, but later he found out that I'm not Malayali. But I'm ready to pass off as any, truly. But since we are speaking of identity and cartography, I'll just narrate a very short incident, I was asked to write a poem, like a story poem, since it's a session for storytelling, story poem for a Nagaland school board textbook. So the Nagaland school board textbook person told me, here's the folktale of Jina Etiben. Jina Etiben is like Laila Majnu, like he Ranja, Romeo Juliet. So it's a love story. And where, they suffer, they die, they come back together if fate allows them to. So it's an Ao Naga story. I don't know, like Prajwal said, we ourselves don't know much about our own places. How much do I know about Nagaland? I know there's Aos, there are Angami, there are Sema Nagas, there are Konyaks, but that's all. I mean, I cannot just keep boasting and beating my 56-inch chest. The 56-inch reference. Yeah. So, but I said yes, I will write if people are happy with it. So I wrote the story poem based on the folktale they sent to me, and it went back to the Naga board. The school teachers heavily opposed. I mean, half of them heavily opposed, half of them supported it. In the long run, the good news is that it was accepted, and it ran on for 3 or 4 or 5 years in the school textbook where children read it. So it's something good to know that as an outsider, I could actually rewrite a story as a poem. And despite the identity discovery that we are doing here, we're talking about how much Assamese we are, how much Nepali or Sikkimese, or I don't know how much Bengali am I. Bengalis have sometimes rejected me, saying she cannot come sing Tagore songs, Robindra Songita at Poila Boishak. She cannot do that, or whatever. But it doesn't matter. I think it's a journey where cartographies ought to be redone. Because what is a map after all? Those are just lines you draw, right? The colonial project is heavily cartographic. They just drew a line. You had Bangladesh, you had India, you had Pakistan. But in my recent visit to Dhaka Translation Fest last year in October, I found that there is so much contiguity. There is heterogeneity. There is also so much contiguity in what we speak, what we write, the stories we share. And I think in the long run, storytelling should attempt at bringing in all these disparate features, and whether you are a Nepali, a Gurkha, Brahmin, Kayast, whatever. And I think it matters to bring out the marginalized, because as a writer, we have some duty. I feel if we do not have a social duty, as a poet, I feel it's my duty to talk about identities all the time, until and unless, the cows come home, literally. The Gaurakshaks will not come home.
So, we've been discussing the need for, this unity of the Northeast to be also seen as diverse, basically. So, and not to expect each of you to know everything about the other state. And that's unreasonable. It's like asking a Tamilian to know everything about Kannada literature.
Or even about our own state. Assam, yes. For instance, I don't know that much about Boros or Mishings as I should, I feel. There's a lack in me. So that is...
Considering Boros are the probably largest tribal community.
Absolutely, yes.
Largest ethnic community.
And did make a mark in the 80s when they did agitate. Okay, I think this is a good time to see if we have any questions from the audience. If you could raise your hand. It's a Saturday morning, so I don't know whether there would be any questions. There's one man who's either rubbing his neck or trying to raise his hand. Okay, so if they don't have a question in mind, I wanted to ask, how much is have you read Nepali literature? How much did that influence your writing?
Mala...
do you read Nepali?
I do. I do read Nepali. I read Nepali badly, which is why translations are so important. There is a publishing house in Delhi that has been doing a very good job of translating all the Nepali greats. Speaking Tiger has been translating Indra Bahadur Rai, our Shakespeare, they've translated a collection of short stories from him and a novel. So that's all good. I would like to believe, I used to believe my written Nepali was very good, and then I attempted to translate the stories in The Gorkha's Daughter into Nepali. I was in New York then, my parents were in Gangtok, there were a lot of phone calls made. I gave up midway. Now, which is when my parents very jokingly said, oh, maybe we could do it. So my parents translated The Gorkha's Daughter into Nepali.
That's wonderful. That's really
which was amazing because, it totally took our relationship to a new level. We became collaborators. There was common ground. Now, Nepali is not a dying language, thankfully. It's a thriving language. You go anywhere in the Nepali-speaking world, you will come across a dozen self-published poets, a dozen self-published novelists who will give you a copy of their book and insist that you take it home with them. Because I cannot write very well in Nepali, it's a beautiful language. There is so much onomatopoeic deliciousness in it. I try to get my love for the language spilled into the books I write. I've often called Land Where I Flee my love letter to the Nepali language, So what is unfair, what is really sad, and I've seen this happening all over India, all over Africa, the fact that we've received a certain kind of education means the vernacular has been ignored, yada yada. I hope it gets better with the subsequent generations. My New Year's resolution for 2019 was to read at least 12 books in Nepali, one for every month. I don't know if I'll succeed. I'll let you know next year when I come.
Okay. And what about you, Nabina? And I'll end with you, Mitra.
Yeah,
Oh, there's one question, so maybe we can take that.
Hello. I think it's the question is more specifically for Ms. Phukan and Ms. Das. We all know that in Assam, in the tea gardens, there is a good population of Odias working in the tea gardens. Whether they have any chance of interacting with them or studying them and writing about them.
can I quickly say something? I think that's a wonderful question and very important because we are talking about how to bring the marginalized writers, marginalized voices to the larger public. A friend of mine, actually my publisher, Dibyajyoti Sharma, who runs the Red River Poetry Publishing House, he has translated a tea garden poet, Sananta Tati. Sananta Tati is a very, very important name in Assamese writing. He is from the tea garden community, but he writes in Assamese. He does have a few poems also in the tea garden Creole, if you may call it, but he chose to write mostly in Assamese. So his poems have been translated into a nice volume by Red River. The person is Dibyajyoti Sharma, who's the translator. And I've gone through that book, I've reviewed it, and I'm an admirer of Sananta Tati's writing. And I feel at least there has been a start where we are hearing one major poet from the tea garden community being translated into English. And that's why translations are very important. And to answer your questions, I'm sure the Odia speakers or the Hindi, Bhojpuri speakers, and the other communities which form this conglomerate of tea garden people, the community, should be heard and would be heard soon if we only keep up our translation efforts seriously. And I really think this is the need of the hour because we are talking so much about different languages and communities and ethnicities. Only way to bridge it is also by reading them, by reading from them and into them. So get them into translation, get them out. So I think that way, tea garden writers have a way to come out now. This is the time. Yeah, I'll pass on to Mitra. You want to say something about
this? Yes, Sananta Tati is of course a shining example, and I would like to say that culture is not just literature; it's an important thing. The tea tribes, the dances, the music forms a very important cultural strand in the music of Assam and also in the dances also. And the songs are also stories in many ways. The songs are stories. To the best of my knowledge, the songs have not been translated, but they are performed all the time. So it is a very strong stand, and I think as gradually as translations happen into other languages, we will know much more.
Okay, so since the conversation has ended on translations, we are out of time. So we have the good fortune of releasing Prajwal's translation of the Gorkha's Daughter into Odia, which has been done by Chaudhary Ranjita Praharaj and published by Dhauli Press. So I would like to invite Chaudhary Ranjita Praharaj and Manuji onto the stage so that along with Prajwal we can all witness the launch of that book. So yes, you have copies, we can show them all off. So the book is available at the bookstore in both English and in Odia. And I'd like to thank Mitra Di, Nabina and Prajwal as well as Ranjita ji and Manuji for this session and this translation. there is a lot that can be said about the outrageous thing we do in literature festivals is to have these deep topics and then just skim over them in 50 minutes. The idea therefore is that you get picked enough to go and pick up these books and read about them, or read them better still, and then there may be some sense to just skimming over these rather important topics. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.